Well, this is great, isn't it? Today we're talking about another one of these American players who captained a Canadian team, and a guy who inevitably asked out. The fact that there is now two of them in recent memory, between Quinn Hughes of the Vancouver Canucks and today's subject, Brady Tkachuk, formerly of the Ottawa Senators, is quite interesting. And it's even more interesting when you acknowledge the fact that these guys were roommates, I'm pretty sure, with the NTDP. But I digress. Talking about all these American dudes that have defected Canada and wanted to play in the US and wanted to play for one of four teams, and guys that were all in cahoots with each other at Team USA at the Olympics in Milano Cortina. There was tampering in Milan, I tell you. Today we're talking about Brady Tkachuk, formerly of the Ottawa Senators, because a report that was posted about by Jeremy Rutherford that indicates where things were going with Brady Tkachuk and his trade situation this summer reveals some pretty shocking info. You see, a lot of folks would go out there and talk about the Tkachuk brothers as products of their dad. Quite literally, like they're sons of Keith Tkachuk, an NHL Hall of Famer and one of the only National Hockey League American players to have done the things that he has done. 1,000 points, 1,200 games, 500 goals. Keith's a pretty accomplished guy. Keith Tkachuk also spent the majority of his NHL career with the St. Louis Blues. He was a Winnipeg Jet for a while. Winnipeg then became Phoenix, so Keith went along with that. And then from Phoenix came Arizona, where Keith Tkachuk played the remaining years of his NHL career. He had a brief stint as an Atlanta Thrasher before going back to St. Louis the summer after. And so Keith Tkachuk, especially when you look at the time when Brady and Matthew were born, these guys were born in Arizona. Brady was born in Phoenix and Matthew was born in Scottsdale because their dad was a player for the Coyotes. It makes sense, right? But when Keith found himself in St. Louis, that's where a lot of the pictures and the memories and all that stuff that you see at the NHL draft floor and whatnot, that's where all that stuff comes from. You saw a lot of pictures of Brady and Matthew Tkachuk as kids when Keith Tkachuk was a Blue, hanging out around the rink and meeting NHL superstars and doing all the things that kids of NHL players love to do. There was a pretty distinct and noticeable connection between Brady and Matthew Tkachuk and the St. Louis Blues, especially when they were younger. So it stood to reason that when Matthew Tkachuk wanted out of Florida a few years ago, it was quite obvious that, okay, he wants to go to these southern, eastern American teams. Maybe he wants to go to Dallas, maybe he wants to go to Nashville, maybe he wants to go to Florida or Tampa, and especially St. Louis, Missouri. These were all the teams that we had discussed in Matthew Tkachuk trade rumors all those years ago. And inevitably, Matthew found himself in Florida. The rest is history. He won a couple of cups. It's no big deal. Now, this is what Jeremy Rutherford, St. Louis Blues beat reporter, wrote about in The Athletic earlier in July. The Ottawa Senators' Brady Tkachuk did not want to come to St. Louis. There were also conflicting reports about whether the Stars' Jason Robertson was interested too. And this is quite the hit for the St. Louis Blues. You see, to hear one thing, okay, yeah, Jason Robertson doesn't want to come over to our team. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. A lot of people were talking about Jason Robertson. Where could he get traded to? Dallas isn't signing him. He had 100 points a few years ago and 96 this most recent season. Jason Robertson's on top of his game. He finally started producing in the playoffs again. He's a very legitimately talented player, but he rejected $15 million a year in Seattle. You don't think he's going to go reject Seattle and then go to St. Louis after, right? That's probably not going to happen. Even if you offer him up as much money as he could possibly achieve elsewhere, the team quality and the team's success seems to matter a lot when it comes to these Jason Robertson things. I'm not surprised to hear that he maybe wouldn't have been interested in going to St. Louis. but Brady Tkachuk at the same time? That kind of hurts, does it not? Like, if St. Louis was the place where Brady was wearing Blues-related jackets and sweaters and t-shirts growing up, watching his dad, oh, look at this, the St. Louis Blues, we're going to cheer for our dad, we're going to cheer for the Blues. And he did that for most of his childhood. And now it comes out in 2026, oh yeah, he's captaining a Canadian team. He wants to leave. The team doesn't like him anymore. They're pissed off because of him and the podcast. They're pissed off because of him and his dad. And then it's like, oh, well, he doesn't actually want to go to the team that he cheered for growing up. That's so disappointing to hear, I feel. Ultimately, you see at the end of the day, Brady Tkachuk just wanted to play with his brother. That seems to be the only way things would have gotten done in regards to a Brady Tkachuk trade. It was gonna be to Florida. But hey, guess what? This ain't the first time a player has only allowed himself get traded to Florida. It happened a few years ago. Happened with Claude Giroux, happened with Tarasenko, it happened with Brady Tkachuk, under various circumstances. Happened with Seth Jones too. Y'all remember that? Yeah, Seth Jones got traded to Florida. He won a cup with them. There are a number of players over the years who have demanded their way to the Florida Panthers. Dylan Larkin is trying to be one of them. Connor Hellebuck maybe was interested in being one of them, although it seems more so like he's interested in being a Sabre instead. But Brady Tkachuk turning his back on the team that he cheered for growing up and ultimately rejecting the idea of being the face that runs the place in St. Louis, probably one of the only places in North America that would have loved him more than the Ottawa Senators fan base loved him. That's a bold take. You know, like, Sens fans, for a while, they did absolutely bleed red and gold with Brady Tkachuk, and they bled for Tkachuk. Okay, hopefully they weren't literally doing that. It was more of a metaphorical thing. If you're bleeding for the purpose of the hockey team that you cheer for, like, if you're just a fan and you're, like, actively doing stuff that's causing you to bleed, probably stop that. That's not ideal. If you're a pro athlete playing, then okay, fine, you're getting paid to do whatever it is you need to do. But for Brady Tkachuk, he was black, red, and gold for years, up until this podcast started, and I think that seems to be like the beginning of the end for not only his reputation in the locker room, but his reputation amongst the fans in Ottawa. Like, could you imagine? No, we don't even need to imagine. Can you project just how loud those boos are going to be every time he touches the puck as a member of the Florida Panthers this upcoming season in Ottawa? And to mention the fact that he ended up not doing anything in the playoffs too. 0 points in 4 games against Carolina. Dare I say, the Senators were the most challenging team for Carolina in this most recent Stanley Cup run. Not their second round opponent that they absolutely stomped. They swept the... Who did they sweep in round 2 again? Philadelphia, that's who it was. Rick Tocchet, yeah. They swept the Flyers, they had their way with the Canadiens, had a little bit of a speed bump against Vegas, but they still ultimately won, and they looked convincing in that victory. I will say that Ottawa, despite the fact that they got swept by the Hurricanes, they were the tightest matchup for Carolina. Were they not? Anyways, we've gotten too far off the point here. Brady Tkachuk seems like he didn't want to go to St. Louis, and if you're a Blues fan, how do you feel about that? Is that kind of betrayal in your mind? I'm, like, trying to project my own personal feelings into this, but of course, I'm not a Blues fan. I'm not from Missouri. You can let me know your thoughts in the comment section below about this Brady Tkachuk thing. I hope you enjoyed this Vitashashroll 9, and bye.